Where we at? What we doing?
Yo, we are at a watch party. We have the Richard Hatch. The Richard Hatch at our watch party. Let's go!
He didn't have these tats when he was on in Borneo.
No. And didn't have much of this either.
Last night, I watched episode 4 at Missy and Aaron's Rhode Island watch party in East Greenwich, Rhode Island, at Finn's Harborside. It was a fun venue. The restaurant is closed for a couple of months in the winter, and so they take it over, and we had a really good time, I think, with a lot of Rhode Island fans who came to see the show. Watching with Jeremy, that was a blast. He was sitting right behind me. I was sitting right in front of the screen. I'm not sure how much he could even see the screen through me, but when I'm watching the show, I try to pay attention so that I can really get a good feel for what might be going on that island and in that episode so I can share it with you, and so I can think about it, so I can talk about it. And the episode begins with Rob coming back from tribal council, having just gotten rid of Ethan last episode, and talking with Adam and saying, "I felt trapped." You know, I don't give Rob a lot of kudos because it's clear he plays the game well after all the times that he's been on there. And it's clear he should be more of a target than he is. But I've got to say, he does play well. He comes up with some really clear insights about good gameplay, and he exercises them. And last night, to tell Adam, I felt trapped, done, on with, ends any question about why he didn't follow Adam's lead to get rid of Parvati and blah, 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 blah. It's just no discussion. I felt trapped. Continue on. That's what happened. Deal with it. I like that. There's no apologies. There's no anything. He's just doing what he needed to do. And what he needed to do was get rid of Ethan rather than his closer ally, Parvati, I think, is from his perspective what he would say. But let's talk about Adam. What's going on with the kid? So here's my take on Adam. There's a little bit of a calm presentation of what I think is happening inside Tony. So Tony's insides match his outsides. Freneticism. Bing, 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 a pinball machine, right? That's Tony. You're always seeing the kind of bouncing around, what's happening, what should I be doing, kind of stuff. That, I think, is what's happening in Adam's head, but you're not seeing it. So last night, you're seeing him recognize that the approach he took bit himself in the ass. Going to Rob and sharing all the plans that the other people he was aligned with had made was not a good move, not a helpful move for Adam. We didn't think it was when it happened, and we see last night clearly it wasn't. But how we know it wasn't is evidenced in how we see Adam's night unfold. So Adam's going around, can I wash your dish? Anybody need any water? I mean, bleh. It's awful. It's really, really awful. This, I think Adam's quote was something about he had enough hubris. He had so much hubris, he thought he could pull it off. And I agree with him. He had too much hubris. It was something that he should have been able to see would have been unlikely to pull off. But the consequences are he's outed. Everybody's aware of how many sides he was playing. Okay, that's not so bad in an all-winners game. Everybody's playing many sides. But how do you deal with being exposed? Are you cool, calm, collected, moving on, and still kind of in the driver's seat? like Rob with a comment, well, I felt trapped and so well, and moves on? Or are you sucking up kind of sickeningly, pretending that if you apologize and I'm so sorry and I did this and do you want any water and anybody need this and how about I watch all of that stuff, that approach, that way of dealing with having been exposed as someone who's manipulating others is not helpful in your own gameplay moving forward. Adam running around apologizing isn't going to serve him well. People are going to see him as kind of a sucker who's not playing well and playing both sides and not to be trusted, as opposed to a competent player upon whom they can rely. That's the key here. Clearly everybody understands a little bit at least of what Survivor is and how things have to happen and how trust isn't set in stone usually. But if you're so sappy and apologetic and so limp-noodled as it seemed Adam was last night, I don't think that serves your game at all, and I think we'll see that play out over time. I didn't like watching him running around apologizing, and I thought to myself, geez, he should know better as a winner. He should have a better understanding of the game. And there were so many comments that he made that I just think weren't helpful to him. So I think that's going to play out to Adam's detriment. And what I really liked is that Ben sees it that way too. I saw Ben, I don't know, I hope people are recognizing, I know I keep talking about how handsome he is, and he is very sexy. But I'm also thinking, I hope it's not I'm just blinded by how good looking he is, that he's playing well. A lot of what Ben is saying makes really good sense. Ben sees this mode, this way in which Adam has poorly played things out. And he talked about it a little last night. And I liked that. I liked seeing somebody voice how clearly Adam's choices were wrong, were not as effective, and certainly were undermining, Michelle and Jeremy and Ben, everybody. What did you think last night of Yule? What did you think of his kind of, his like spreading happiness? I'm such a curmudgeon. Usually, you'll probably think I'm gonna tear him apart. I loved it. It's another part of Survivor, and I think Yule's comments about how the happy times are a big part of the show too is absolutely accurate. And I think the way in which Yule kind of went around and hugged everybody and good morning and waking people up and letting them know how far they'd made it and how effective they'd been so far, I think that's brilliant. I think it's wonderful. I think it's evidence of Yule's comfort, which can be perceived by others as confidence, but not overconfidence. It's all good. Yule's a smart guy, and I think those were good choices. I think that will play out really well for him. Let's talk about Edge of Extinction and the log challenge last night. I've got a couple of thoughts that I think I'd like people to chew on. One is whether or not those are the types of entertaining scenes that you want to see. From my perspective, what you saw for almost a quarter of last night's show had almost nothing to do with the game of Survivor. And as a fan, I'd just like you to consider whether or not that's something you're interested in seeing. Was it emotional? Sure. Was some of it interestingly a look at who we are as people? Sure. Those are parts of the show. Those are parts of Survivor that draw viewers in. But when it's as detached from the game as the Edge of Extinction log challenge was, I question the people's, the decision makers' choices about including it and including it at length the way they did. So, for example, all of that back and forth and up and down the mountain and putting the logs, I mean, it was all designed to emotionally tug because Ethan was struggling. It was a very, very tough challenge. But Ethan's a close friend of mine, personally, outside the game. Ethan's battle with cancer battles with cancer were profound and impactful. And he's an incredible speaker, and he talks about them often around the country. And he's doing really wonderful things, and he's a super great guy. Nobody better, period. But when you put him on a show like that, and from my perspective, you use that kind of cancer survivor stuff to get the viewers to kind of feel for him in a way that is really kind of detached from his cancer struggle. I'm not sure I'm comfortable with it. I'm not even sure I like it. And it distracts from the game. It's really not a big part of the game. The truth is, Ethan's fit. Ethan's in really good shape, and he's healthy, and he's cancer-free. And yes, we're all getting older, and that was an incredibly tough challenge, that up and down the mountain 20 times. But Ethan made some really dumb choices. Dumb, and should be held accountable for those dumb choices. Ethan pushing himself to try and be first ahead of the three girls. What does beating those three women have to do with anything? There is no reason whatsoever, no benefit in any way, shape, or form to Ethan's having pushed himself the way he did at first. Why didn't all of them do a little more like Danny and simply take their time? Why didn't any of them take a trip up the mountain, grab the log, go back, put it down by the fire, and then take a swim, cool their body temperature down, and then go back to it? They had the entire day, and they all finished, even Ethan, more than 2 hours before the sun went down. So they had an enormous amount more time to do, to finish, to complete the challenge and to earn a fire token. And they weren't competing against one another. It wasn't, oh, you get a fire token if you're the first one down. It was, if you do this, you get a fire token. I'm not sure, I don't want to take away from you as a viewer, your intelligence or your awareness in watching the game, but I've gotten many comments from people, and I think many of you didn't even realize that it wasn't a challenge, didn't even realize how unnecessary that kind of an exertion of effort was. And that's interesting. And actually all of this that I'm talking about now, that kind of exertion, you can use to kind of ask yourself, who is playing well within the context of the game? So from that perspective, you can relate it to the game. But it was really so separate. Further, I want you to understand the editing. You see Jeff very carefully carved out, scripted almost. He's incredibly practiced. He thinks ahead of time about what he's going to say. He says only what he wants to say. He's very, very careful with his wording. It is not the same as participants who are filmed 24 hours haphazardly, whatever it is that they want to use about, with regard to filming, about us, each of the participants they use. That's not the same with Jeff. Jeff is a character as a host that is carefully composed in a way that has you feeling as you do about him. The same thing happened on Edge of Extinction last night, which will give many of you an opportunity to consider what editing does to you. What does editing of the Survivor episodes do to you as a viewer? So last night, while Ethan was suffering, challenged, feeling faint, all of those things that are valid, he was wobbly. The medics did come over and they asked him, how are you feeling and those kinds of things. And he sat down, and he feels like when he sat down, he may have passed out. And then, rested for a while, and that's when the medic that you saw in the footage was talking to him. But what you did not see in the footage was that the medic gave him a salt tablet. The medic gave him sugar pills. The medic gave him water. And those things do very, very positive and powerful things to a player within the game of Survivor who has not had food. What are your thoughts about non-life-threatening situations in which the participant is not removed from the game and is fed, given salts, given sugar, and even water, which, although there is water that participants can get to, they can't get to it in the same way as clean bottled water that is handed to you by staff. Should the other people who were going up and down that mountain have been given the same amounts of sugar, the same water? Should those people outside of extinction, edge of extinction, been given salts and water and sugar in order to make the gameplay equal and level? Those are some really interesting questions in my mind. They go to many, many things that I contemplate in detail because as a player of the game, I know how important they are. So would it bother me if somebody did get those things and I didn't? That certainly happened in season 1. Kelly was being fed the entire show. It's something for you to think about. And it goes to the editing. They were lying to you last night about what unfolded with Ethan and how serious or not serious it was. Everybody was tired and exhausted. Everybody wondered whether they could make it through the whole thing, and they used different techniques to get through it. Ethan struggled, but it was not a life and death situation. It wasn't a situation in which those things, those ways in which he was helped were necessary for him to be unharmed. Where do you stand on that? What's the point? So why did Survivor, why did Jeff Probst and the editors, why did they choose to lie to you? That's what I want you to ask yourself, because they could have shown you what happened and let you have a conversation about whether or not others should have been exposed to the same kinds of help. It's a really touchy thing for me, and it really frustrates me, and I love being the voice trying to hold the integrity of the show up, because the show itself, the game, is really, really good and healthy and valuable, and something that I know fans are wanting to be as pure as possible. We're all humans, and there are all kinds of problems and mistakes that could happen. But the intentionality, the intentions with which Probst and others are being untruthful to you, the viewer, is increasing. It has been there all along, and their hubris, their egos, their wealth, I'll explain that some other time, that all of those things are preventing them from remaining in touch with what it is that makes the show so valuable and treating you, the viewers, with respect. They're not doing that anymore, and the show is suffering as a result. So that's why you see me sometimes go off on these points that may or may not seem important to all of you. They're really important to the players themselves. Ethan himself was concerned, even in the moment when it was happening, about whether or not others should be given the same assistance that he was being given. Were he in a position where his health was potentially harmed, permanently harmed or something, Of course, he shouldn't have been thinking about those things, but it shows you his level of awareness and what a bright person and a caring person he is, that even he was wondering, is this fair? It's an interesting thing, I think, and I hope you think so too. It's why I'm sharing it with you. Okay, that's Edge of Extinction. That whole distraction finished. Took up a lot of the show, a lot of time during which we could have gotten many more insights into who those players are and how they're playing this season. But let's move on. And one of the interesting things that I noticed, loved actually, was Jeremy saying something about how Adam is acting like one of his kids. You know how when you're a kid and you get in trouble, or, maybe Jeremy, punished them, or they're in timeout or whatever it is, and then they get all sorry and trying to do everything so perfect. It's really cute in a child. It's so not cute in the game of Survivor, and it's so obvious, and it's really off-putting. And it's a bad, bad choice. I know I've talked about it a little earlier already, but I just want to point it out again, because in this part of the game, that's one of the comments Jeremy makes. Something about how Adam is acting like one of his children and kind of sucking up in order to try and get back in people's good graces. I get a kick out of that. We've got to give some kudos to Rob, because Rob was attempting to get Adam last night, after having voted out Ethan, to talk more negatively and make plans against Jeremy and Michelle, etc. The alliance that Adam had already disclosed to Rob earlier. And Adam refrained from doing that. Great. But evidence of Adam's kind of missing things and really just not playing very well again was the pride he had, the way in which he felt so good about not having said anything negative about Michelle or Ben or whoever, Jeremy. That's silly, and that misses what really goes on in the game. Because it doesn't matter whether or not you said anything negatively about them. It doesn't matter whether you're plotting against them now again with Rob and Parvati. What matters is what gets communicated to them. And that's where the kudos to Rob come in. He had a really bright move, I think, last night, by going to those folk, going to Jeremy and Michelle and saying to them, in a very carefully thought through way that didn't look as if he were trying to tattle or pretend or anything else, just in a comfortable off the cuff way, he expressed how, Adam's continuing, same thing. Yeah, he's talking to me about what to do, and he's already screwed you guys, and he's, screwed me, obviously, but now he's trying to get me to go along, and I don't want to listen to it anymore. Buddies, pals, teammates, alliance members. Oh my God, so funny. But it was well done, so it wasn't stupid. Rob made a really good choice, I think, in exposing this false narrative to Jeremy. And what do we see in the show immediately thereafter? Jeremy talking to Michelle about it, and Michelle's sick of it. Michelle's sick of having to listen to Adam flip and flop, and Jeremy's sick of having to babysit Adam. Perfect. The exact intention on Rob's part fulfilled on screen. It was great. We got to see that whole concept play out. How Adam avoided doing anything like that. How Rob didn't care whether he avoided doing it. How Rob was going to use it to his advantage anyway and lie. Tell the other players that Adam had been doing those things. That's Survivor, folk. That's the game. It's complicated. You can do that kind of on multi-levels in many different ways, and you have to decide whether to do that or not. In this case, I really like that Rob decided to do it. I think his choice and timing were excellent, and I think the effect was exactly as he intended. And we'll see what happens with that. What did you think last night about Sarah playing with Tyson? Being really playful with the comments and the back and forth, and kind of talking about how bonded they were in their sense of humor and in the way in which they interacted kind of lightly. That does uplift you during this really exhausting game. I thought it was interesting and good of her to do that. If, however, she were so bought into it, if she believed all of what she was saying as strongly as it appeared she did, that they were super close and that they had this really great bond, that has me a little bit concerned about Sarah. And the reason I think that she believed it was that she was sharing how happy she was about that with us, not with other players. So there's no reason to kind of lie to viewers unless you're trying to keep the producers who are filming you talking to the viewers from understanding exactly what you're thinking, because you don't want it transmitted some way that viewers and other players may not even know. Wow, the levels. But that happens. I had to do that, and I'm sure others do that as well. Anyway, Sarah was being very playful with Tyson, and that was interesting for me to watch. Sandra was then listening intently to Tyson too. She was pretending to pay attention to Tyson. But when she shared with viewers what was going on in her head, she talked about how she never lets her heart dictate the game. She talks about how she doesn't let her emotions overwhelm her. She talks about, well, whatever he said, but he's probably lying, or he's lying, and she's not going to let any of what interacted between them change the course she perceives to be the most effective one. Those were real clues for me as to where tribal council would likely head. You can never know, and much of it's edited, so you can't be certain about where the show is ever going to go just based on a scene or what you've seen in editing. But I like the hints that are available for someone watching closely. What do you all think about Sandra and how often she sits out of the challenges? I got a kick out of Parvati saying, why don't we name it the Sandra Sit-Out Bench? I thought that was great. But Sandra is unapologetic about that, and it has worked to her favor. It's been really helpful for her, because she's not ended up in challenges where her performance has been a drain on the team or affected people so negatively that she then gets targeted. And she must think that that's possible, if not likely, given the amount of time she spends on the bench. As often as possible, it seems, she tries to sit out of those challenges. And I think it's a decent strategy for Sandra. It has worked for her, as Tyson said, he mentioned. That's, kind of one of the things she's known for. But if you're a Survivor player other than Sandra, I'd be very cautious about doing that, because you are putting the eyes on you. You are then thought about. Others are thinking, hey, she's not in the game. He's not playing. What's going on? And me, personally, if I saw someone sitting out and I wanted to protect someone with whom I were more closely aligned, who'd screwed up in the challenge, I would make quite a big deal out of the person who was sitting out, and pointing out that, yeah, maybe my buddy might not have done really, really well, but look how hard he tried, and he did the best he could. And would she have done any better if she were in there? We have to take into account whether you're playing the game or not if you're going to hold people accountable within the game for their performance. What else was going on in that challenge? Would you have assigned 3 short people to jump to reach keys? I don't get it. That's not a good choice. You know, sure, you might have wanted taller, lankier folks pulling the boat and swimming, but it wouldn't take much to think through that challenge as you were being asked by Jeff to assign players to the different segments, that you needed at least one tall person in that jumping segment in order to get those keys. So I didn't like that. I didn't like that they chose 3 short people who really struggled and took quite a long time to get the keys. What do you know? It didn't matter. Here we go again with the arbitrariness of challenges. It's amazing to me. They take up so much of the show, and they're, interesting. We as a culture, we Americans, we love like sports and competing and who's going to win and who's not. But when it comes down to it, in this very, very sophisticated game called Survivor, the challenges aren't all as terribly important as they're made out to seem. And they do take up so much time. But so be it. It's part of the deal. And how fun are they to watch? And how fun, particularly last night, for that team to have come from so far behind to move through that puzzle in the way they did. And who were the puzzle people? Who were the folks assigned to doing the puzzle? The same folks who failed at puzzles multiple times before. But it worked out well this time. They did it. They won spectacularly, pulling ahead of the other team who had all of that time to build the puzzle. Good job. I loved these next scenes where I talked earlier about some of the tips or hints or ways in which my head sees or evaluates some of what we're seeing in the episode and then thinks, this could be an indicator of what might happen in Tribal. Here again were some clips, were some places at which I think we got some hints. Tyson was lobbying to get rid of Nick. And it's not just that he was lobbying to get rid of Nick. Yul was pretending to go along. Maybe he was going along. Sandra was too. The fact that they were showing people going along with Tyson's lobbying to get rid of him was a part of what made me think, I wonder if this is going to be a foreshadowing of what might happen later. But it's also the way in which Tyson was so comfortable, appeared unconcerned about the way in which he was lobbying these other players to get rid of Nick. There was this level of comfort that, it turns out we see, becomes overconfidence. And actually, to me, appeared irrationally confident when he was doing it. Those types of things are clear flags for me. They go, geez, whether it really does turn out to highlight what happens later or not, it gives me much, much, much more data about the player who at that moment in time, for whatever reasons, could be no food, could be exhausted, is letting his or her game slip. When you are that comfortable, when you're that unquestioning, when you're that openly pursuing a course of action that should require much more consideration. And let's talk about Tony in this whole dynamic. Tyson tells Tony that the two of them need to stick together. Okay, do they? Well, good on you, Tyson, for telling Tony that you do, because it spurred in Tony thoughts about why that's true. And actually, some of those thoughts were really valid, really good, sophisticated survivor play valid. So Tony had to then think about, wait, Tyson has quite a target on his back. And if we were to get rid of him, who does that leave in the sights of the other players? And, Sandra had to consider that as well, because it's true. They talk about these meat shields. Tyson was a good shield for some of these other players. But the truth is, everybody has to go other than you if you want to win the damn game. And so it's just a matter of when it's most appropriate. And if he's been a shield for a minute or two, or for however long, even though it's early in the game, and he's a threat, and he's completely and utterly unaware that it might be his time to go, that's a perfect time for most people to take somebody out. And I don't think, from at least what we were able to see as viewers last night, that Tony was as aware of that risk-benefit analysis as I would have hoped. I think he more kind of openly and out loudly, haphazardly kind of goes back and forth until he lands on something. And you might argue that that's just his process, and eventually he makes a decision and, he has won the game. I think that would be a valid argument, but I think that process, so outspoken, so uncontrolled, the exact opposite of Kim, for example, who, haven't talked about it all tonight because she's so serene in the way appearing. She appears so serene in the way in which she plays the game. I just have to credit her because I think that's much more effective gameplay for so many different reasons. But watching Tony kind of muddle through what he needed to do and live in angst openly among other players about what was the best choice reminded me of the different ways in which different players manage the stress of the game. And nobody could argue anything but that Tony is fun to watch. And Tony's angst continued at Tribal Council. Tony talked about the bonds and the personal bonds, and you could see the emotion. You could see he's a good-hearted person. You could see he's real. I loved how earlier Yule talked about, I thought Tony was going to be an asshole. Or maybe it's not earlier, and it's now. I thought Tony was going to be an asshole, but he's a good guy. Yeah, I mean, we're all decent people, I think. And when we meet one another, often these ideas about who we were as game players get mixed then with what we're experiencing one-on-one, and we start to question, is the one-on-one true, or is what I saw in the edit true? Or we're whole people, so it's more complicated than that. It's not easy to understand somebody really, really well in such a short amount of time, but that's the skill of a good Survivor player. You have to be able to do pretty well at coming to those understandings of people relatively quickly. And I think Tony was struggling with how he would be thought of by Tyson, which is why he was talking about these bonds that we make so quickly. And Tribal Council probably isn't the place to talk about that. Is it true people bond there? Sure. But if you're really playing the game, that's not interfering with how you're playing it. All of the players who are playing well understand that there are persons, people, decent people with whom you're playing. Outside the game, you might even enjoy their friendship. But they are to be used within the game. They are to be exploited within the game. The goal is for you to get to the end and be that really powerful super Survivor player that fans can really get behind and love the way in which you did not care about anything but doing what it took to win the game. So it is fun to see people's hearts interfere and the ways in which their emotions confused choices. That's all part of watching Survivor and why I think it is so good a show even today, 40 seasons later. But for you super fans who really, really want to know how to play, watch those times when the emotions come out, because they're evidence that there are cracks. Those times are evidence of people not having enough food, not having enough sleep, and the stresses that cause you to lose sight of what should be your focus in a really well played game. Fun stuff, right? I got a kick out of Yule saying at Tribal Council how he was surprised by liking everybody. I'm not sure I believe that, but I like that he said it because that's Yule and maybe that's some gameplay. Yule is really bright and thoughtful and contemplates his choices. So I'm a little bit skeptical about whether he was really surprised about liking people, because I'm sure he would have thought ahead of time that these people, most of them must all have been likable in order to have been selected. So I don't know. Can you tell? I keep talking about Yule in a particular way that seems hopeful and looking forward to what more we might see from him. I hope I'm not disappointed later, but I do. I do think all of the ways in which he talks and all of what we've seen so far are leading us to see more from him in this game, this season as a player. What did you think of Nick exposing in the cutest way, I thought, how Parvati was his crush in high school? I think Tyson took that a little bit hard, thinking about the age difference. Oh, high school, Parvati. That's what I saw on Tyson's face. Who knows? But I thought that was just a fun little insight into someone's honest personality. Those happen quite often in the game as well. And they help me make decisions about who people are and therefore how are they likely to play. All of that time, Tyson was the one to go. Obviously, they voted him out. But I again have to point out Kim's calm. Even at Tribal Council, I wonder how many of you noticed the calm she reflected. Her face wasn't unstable. It wasn't strained. It wasn't concerned. There was a calmness there that really gives me the sense of confidence. She's found her footing. If you remember earlier in this season, she really was thinking about how fast the game was going and was a little off balance. But I think she's found her footing. It was a good episode, but for me, as you heard me say, I think there was too much emphasis on things that weren't necessary for the game and didn't give us as much as we might have been able to absorb with respect to who's playing and how they're playing. But so be it. And the episode ends with Tyson saying something to the effect of, that was too easy. I should have seen it coming. You think, Tyson? You think? Yeah, that's just one of those things when things are that smooth and that easy. If you aren't looking to see what else it might be other than what it appears, you're out of your league. But was that a wake-up call? What are you going to do on the edge of extinction? I'll be looking forward to see. That's that.